Hey, good morning, everyone. I believe we're live and recording right now. Give a minute or two for people to join. Maggie, you in New York today?
I am in New York. Got back from Vegas last night, just
Heard
before the storm rolled in.
Heard the sun's actually going to come out and it's going to be warm and sunny for like a brief few minutes. So hopefully your boss lets you take off and you can get some sun.
Yeah, I told him he only gets me for 45 minutes today. That's it. I'm going to go lay out in the 30-degree weather.
No, it's going to be warm. Give a couple more minutes for people to get in, and then we will jump right into it and move quickly. Okay, so all right, so we'll do some quick intros. So my name is Aaron Rubin. I'm the founder and CEO of ShipHero. ShipHero provides warehouse management software. So a bit over 1,000 buildings in North America use our software to help fulfill omni-channel orders, so e-commerce and retail. And we've been having a lot of conversations with people both in the US as well as those fulfilling from Mexico and Canada about the changes to 321, and also brands who are trying to figure out what to do. And we'll talk about what we know so far and how we see brands reacting. Also, I think today at 1 o'clock, Trump is going to announce reciprocal tariffs, or he's going to have some sort of press conference. So we're going to talk about what we think is going to come. But of course, there's been a lot of rapid changes. So we're going to have to just stay tuned and keep updating people as things go. Next up, we have Cindy Allen. So Cindy's been in this business for about 35 years, working with some of the express carriers on their international clearance and helping a lot of other people on their inbound and their customs clearance. And then we have Maggie Barnett, who's the CEO of LVK, which is fulfillment in the US and Canada, doing domestic fulfillment as well as 321 from Canada for a small number of large omni-channel brands. So we'll start with sort of a quick agenda. So we're going to go through sort of what we think is happening, what we know, and then open up for questions. So hopefully most of this conversation will be around what you want to hear and what you want to know. So we'll try to help as much as we can. So just a brief update on what we know. So in addition to the tariffs, additional tariffs from China, which were 10% on basically every single item, there was an elimination of Section 321 for products made in China as well as Canada and Mexico. Canada and Mexico, that was delayed for 30 days along with the 25% tariff put on them. We think that might continue to be delayed. However, the one from China was implemented and went live. So Section 321 was eliminated, which means all products coming to the US need to pay tariffs and be cleared. So they can't use T86, which was the way of clearing without a broker. They needed to be cleared with a broker. That went into effect and caused a lot of chaos. So I heard over 1 million packages were at JFK at one point waiting. Some items were shipped back to China. Trucks were turned around, trying to cross over from Canada and Mexico. And the administration temporarily reversed the elimination of 321, allowing those items and future items to continue to use T86 and come to the country without tariffs until such time as the government is ready to handle the change. So we have no idea what that timeline is going to be. And once the announcement is made, how long people will have to react. So within a very short period, maybe an hour or so of that announcement that it was 321 was being re-enabled, the CBP allowed those 321 or those T86 to be sent and to be cleared. However, the backlog still hasn't been entirely cleared. So there's still a lot of delays. anyone who ordered stuff for Valentine's Day, or if your brand used it and you had a large Valentine's Day sales, you probably missed that for a large percent of your customers. We see at the Mexico crossing, they say they'll be cleared by Monday. We'll see. There's still a very large backlog. So even though the T86 are being accepted and those things can be cleared very quickly, the chaos of the very short closing resulted in over a week of delays. So, which is pretty interesting as we think what's going to happen when it rolls back out. So I'll pause there, and then Cindy, why don't you give us your thoughts about what's going on and what's going to happen?
Chaos. That's what's happening right now, chaos. Somebody had asked me, what is the pace of change compared to other years or other beginnings of the administration? And I will tell you, typically in any 1 year, it was between 1 to 2 major changes per year in the trade sphere. In the first Trump administration, we clocked that at about 300% changes, additional changes. And now I think we're on track to be around 600% more changes. So it is a rapid fire regulatory, legal, all no holds barred, changes going through. Tariffs are one of these areas. I think the biggest change right now that I've seen in my entire career is that normal channels of communication, normal lobbying, normal, reaching out to the agencies to help them understand how things are being impacted in the industry are not working. All of the decision making seems to be consolidated at the White House. And unless you have direct access to some of these individuals who have influence and sway with the president, it's very difficult to make a case that the industry is being impacted or normal Americans are being impacted. The only thing that I see that they are actually hearing is how many US jobs is this tied to? How many is it going to create? And how do you bring back manufacturing in this sector to the United States? So very, very different environment from any other administration that I've ever worked under or worked with. So knowing that, the changes that are coming out are pretty much hard and fast. There has been also a position that we're going to break everything and then we'll fix it in the areas that need to be fixed. So when I look at the 321 changes, how they were rolled out and then brought back or revoked and then unrevoked, it's kind of in that mindset of, we're going to break this, we're going to see how bad it is, and then it will go back and fix it. And I think that is it's going to be how changes are going to go forward. The 10% China did not get revoked, as we all know. I don't think that that's going to be revoked under this administration. I think we'll probably see more. So let's talk about 321. 321, and just as an aside, I helped design the T86 clearance process because that was needed. Customs actually came to the industry and said, help us design a clearance process because we're seeing more direct to consumer traffic coming into the United States. And there's really no way to clear this in an automated manner to ensure that we're getting all of the information we need to appropriately screen the goods. So we came up with Type 86, a T86, that's basically patterned after the manifest clearance that the express carriers had. And it was named T86 because that was the code that an express carrier sent on the manifest to actually request that Section 321 clearance from Customs. So we took that, said, hey, put this in a broker environment and let's make this work. And Customs actually had to add the HTS classification because the platform that they programmed it under could not be changed and it had to have a classification. So that was the reason the classification was on there in the first part. And because it had a classification, we were able to say, okay, all of the other government agencies that are subject, they tie into the system through a classification. So let's build that as well. It was its own module anyway, so that was the link. So that's really the background on why T86 happened the way it did and why it required an HTS number. Very quickly, Customs started seeing other benefits to having that HTS number, so that became a need rather than a want, or a need, instead of a need based on a technology issue, it was a need for information. So for me, this is really, funny because we designed this at the request of Customs and now they want to take it away. So it just, it's kind of a full circle, in 10 years. So I think a lot of people saw that as an opportunity. That's really, it wasn't the raise of 200 to 800 that made this really explode. It was the ability to automate that clearance process, which you at ShipHero have been able to take advantage of and really assist a lot of small businesses in the United States that would not be in business today if not for this channel. So I think it's really important. Unfortunately, I don't think the president cares. I think he sees this as a loophole. There have been a lot of legislative efforts, a lot of lobbying efforts in the past 10 years to identify this as a loophole, and that has kind of been the thinking on Capitol Hill and definitely within this administration. So, I think we need to prepare ourselves for Section 321 going away, minimum for China. And then I think we'll start seeing it eroded more and more and more until it just is no longer a viable option for importation. So I'll leave it. That's my 5-minute upfront, background.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. And, it was implemented to provide more information when needed and to make the process easier. But, as these things tend to happen, when the US made it easier, more people used it, which actually made it harder then to keep track of the packages to the point where it was pretty much uncheckable. So sort of the success of the system maybe led to its own failure. And then as we think about, what comes next, I always go back to what is the White House trying to accomplish? And I think the White House is trying to accomplish jobs. And if something leads to more US jobs, that's likely going to be the way the administration goes. And eliminating 321 entirely would force a reshoring of the vast majority of that fulfillment, which is going to create more jobs. So my expectation is that that's the way that things are going to go. I know Maggie's been having conversations with lots of brands who are thinking about that. And I don't think that eliminating 321 eliminates fulfillment out of Mexico, for example. So there are still going to be highly, manufactured or kitted items where it still makes sense to leverage the 90% reduction in labor cost of shipping items from Mexico on those, or not manufacturing, and also just sort of assembling, which would be done by 3PLs often. That makes sense. But the brands that were simply using it as a tariff reduction, where it was like, hey, I got a 35% tariff if I ship it straight to the US, 0 if I go through Canada or Mexico, and therefore I'm going through Canada and Mexico. We've been seeing almost all of them leaving. Mexico did their IMEX change prior to this, which eliminated the ability of XB fulfillment, from what I understand, the largest or one of the largest 321 providers for apparel out of Mexico. They couldn't import goods, so that forced a lot of brands out. And whether it comes from China or any other country. So I think what we're seeing is brands say, unless I really need the labor savings from Mexico, there's no point in relying on going outside the US. Let's just domicile in the US. We're going to have to pay the extra, but there's no other choice. So Maggie, why don't you tell us sort of what the conversations you've been having with brands are, how, what are their concerns and how are you trying to help them?
Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you for having me. I think I'm fresh off of Manifest and having a lot of conversations with service providers as well as brands. And I'd say if I had to sum it up in one word, it's just fatigue around the conversation, because they just want to know what the rules are going to be. And I loved how Cindy said, like, the slow erosion. I think that's where they're finding the most uncertainty and the most agita, for lack of a better word, because they just want to be able to make decisions and start working again. And, the first thing they were all doing was, okay, let's just not manufacture in China. Let's go to Vietnam. Let's go to Indonesia. Let's go to Bangladesh. And our advice is similar to what Cindy was saying is, why would they just close this for China? If the mandate is to reduce fentanyl, increase revenues into the US, and increase US jobs, like, why just stop at China? So I think, of course, lobbying and things like that, but that's where the idea of coming back to a US 3PL is basically the best option at this point, because we believe that there will just be that continued erosion, and you might as well just fast forward that instead of trying to over optimize and over index in one country, because it's hard to make changes, especially the large apparel brands that I'm talking to. When you have 2,400 new SKUs a month, that's not an easy move from a 3PL. It's not. So if you have a total of 20 to 25,000 SKUs, we estimate that costs 80 to 100 grand just to move that, just like the labor, let alone the freight. So we're telling folks, be calm. Let's kind of see what's happening. Really work to find good partners. Again, I always like to say, many times brands will refer to their manufacturers as their vendors. And I wish I had my dog with me, Aaron. That's like, I don't have my pups with me, so it's hard to compete with that. So I think the idea is that, to slow down, get some good, what I was saying was, your manufacturers might be vendors and you can pop those up from whatever country, but really look at your fulfillment as a partnership, because they're the last people that touch your product, and kind of like this whiplash back and forth between 3PLs will cause a lot more expense when you're just trying to like over optimize on that last penny. So I think that's the idea, is just like slow it down a little bit, get some good partners on the fulfillment side, on the US side, and then be prepared for a lot of scenarios, and don't try to over index or over optimize so soon, because things are going to change.
Yeah, from a timing perspective, we know that there's two things happening. There is during a comment period, we're in the comment period for 2 CBP changes, one of which adds a bunch of requirements for T86 clearance, and one eliminates 321 for all 301 products. So basically everything from China at this point. Probably more importantly, the Trump administration is ordered to report, I think, by February 1st. So at the latest, April 1st, for changes, including changes to 321. So I would expect that would be, there's a high probability that's a pretty broad change. And, we were talking about this, back in like September and August, before people were really thinking about 321. But part of the reason we were talking about it was bills moving through Congress, which included things like a $2 per package clearance fee. It starts to not just be the right approach once you're spending an extra $2 just to clear it, and you're paying the tariffs. It just becomes too expensive for these cheap items. So we're expecting lots more changes to come. I see a question from Tyler who's asking about timing. Cindy, have you heard anything from anyone about how long the government's going to take to implement the changes to once again eliminate T86?
No, I have not. And I don't think anyone can really adequately predict what this is. My understanding, and if you look at the actual language in the rescission of that, it talks about having systems in place to address the issue. So why would that be? Well, the biggest thing is postal. The Postal Service actually falls under the UPU, the Universal Postal Union. which is a treaty, and has some, basic requirements in it. That the requirement to do a formal entry does not necessarily violate the UPU treaty. However, the Postal Service has absolutely no way to collect duty, and the executive order on China included the fact that the Postal Service had to make entry. They have no way to do that. So there was no way for anyone in that stream to do a duty payment. Normally, if you ship something of a formal entry, so over $250 or $2,500, they would contact the U.S.
Actually,
Yeah,
it's actually $250 for most of the China items these days, right? $2,500 for everything else.
right. $2,500. It was considered a formal entry in the Postal Service. So if you had something over $2,500, the Postal Service would contact you and ask you who your broker was, and they'd refer that to a broker. Well, when you're talking about 1 million packages coming in, there is absolutely no way the Postal Service could have handled that in its normal formal entry channel. Plus, a lot of these recipients, they have no idea what a customs broker is. They, I grew up in Indiana, and I had no idea this whole industry actually existed, right? I had no idea. So a lot of people have no idea how to even clear customs, that things need clear customs, let alone the fact that a lot of websites and a lot of marketplaces don't tell you you're getting it from China. You just order something and it shows up at your door. And the only way sometimes it's made in China is all the, Chinese writing on the packaging. That's it. So Postal Service had no way to clear this. And you saw, the chaos that caused there when they said they weren't going to accept any more packages from China, which did violate the UPU treaty. So they quickly turned that back on. But they have no way to do this. So my understanding is that the main driver for the rescission is because Postal Service needs to get a system in place. Every other channel has a system. It may be clunky, it may not be good, it may cause, backlogs because of the massive change in a short period of time. However, there's a system in place to do that. So I think once the Postal Service figures that out, it'll be back on. Now, how long will that take? I don't know. It depends on, maybe they go out and get a broker. Maybe they say, okay, everything has to go through this. Or maybe they say you're going to have to pay duty up front. Maybe they get a piece of technology that, calculates that up front and they collect it from the shipper. All of those things are just variables that we don't know how that's going to occur. Or the president could say, we're going to not require that, but we're going to have a flat fee. If it's from China, here's your flat fee of duty if it comes through postal. So it's not incentivized to go there, because one of the things that has been an issue from day one is the Postal Service has very little requirements for data to send the goods into the United States, where every other channel has to have a higher level of data. So that has been an unfair field of play for quite a while, and this would just exacerbate that. So I think that's what we have to look at. What is the Postal Service going to do? If they do a flat fee, they could probably do that, in a month. If it's more involved, it'll take a little bit longer, but I don't think it's years. I'll be surprised if it's more than several months.
Okay, thanks. So anyone who has questions, please just put it in the comments, and we're going to try to work through as many as we can over the next 15 or 20 minutes. Until we wrap this up. The Postal Service. So just to explain, I guess, the difference between like formal entry, informal entry, and T86. Formal entry is what you do when you like bring a container in. It's very expensive. What's the minimum fee? Like $27 now, $29, Cindy, for the formal entry?
The minimum, the merchandise processing fee?
Yeah.
Is 34 or something.
Okay, so yeah, it's a really significant fee, and you pay per line, so it's pretty complicated. But it's how every container and big air shipment comes in. That's how everyone does it. Then there's informal entry, which is up to $2,500, but was changed as part of this to be only a max of $250 coming from China. So that's the normal way that I think everyone's trying to get items in if T86 is gone. So for example, like company Portless said that that's what they were using. I think it's like type 11 is what they're trying to use. So it's a informal entry, so you don't have that very large fee per package, but you're still required to provide a lot more information than in T86, and then T86, and you need a broker. And then for T86, you don't need a broker at all. And you could just...
No, T86, you do need a broker, but there are brokerage services who have just developed a service offering for T86. But by regulation, it does require a licensed customs broker to file a T86.
Okay, I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Yeah, so a lot of companies who are out there offering T86 services are actually licensed customs brokers with the United States. And customs required that from day one. So it does require a broker, but because most of them were completely automated, they were able to do that at a much reduced cost. So now, and there are many brokers out there who only do type 86. I've had lots of people come to me and say, we need a broker because our broker only does type 86. Who would you recommend? How do we do that? How do we go through that process? So that's the first thing I think brands should look at is, what does my broker do? Are they only doing type 86, or can they do the other types of clearance? And type 86 is basically a request for clearance, a request for release from customs. So all of the shipments are required to file a security filing, ISF, the importer security filing, if it's coming by ocean, an ACAS, which is the air cargo advanced screening, that's filed by the carrier. Then you have a manifest that's filed by the carrier. And then you have this request for release. And if you are outside of the express or truck environment, you do that through a broker through type 86. If you're express, you incorporate that request for release on the manifest. And same thing for truck carriers. They can request that release on their manifest. And then that's done. A type 11 and a type 01 basically have the same amount of data elements. They have to not only send that request for release, but then there's the accounting portion. That's the entry summary that tells customs a little bit more information about the transaction. Here is the buyer and seller. That's not required on release. Here is a little bit more information about the product, but not a heck of a lot, quite frankly. The country of origin, valuation, where it's coming from, where it's being delivered to, what the classification is, those are all on the type 86. So there's just a little bit more information that's required, but you have that payment of duty. So if you're from China, you have regular duty, you have 301 duty, you have what we're calling the IEPA duty, that 10% duty, then you have merchandise processing fees. And because that requires more work, brokers are charging more for that, of course. So they will have a level of work, and that your costs are going to go up. Not only are you going to pay duty and the merchandise processing fee, but you're going to pay that for brokerage. So the question is, how can I save on duty? How can I save on shipping costs? How can I save on brokerage costs? And I think that, Aaron, was the subject of some of our conversations online on LinkedIn and other places, was how can you structure that, and how can you ensure that you lower the cost of the goods? So it's maybe not direct to consumer, but there is a third party in there to address, to be the buyer in the U.S., and that can lower your costs. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. So just to address that, so basically what we're seeing some companies do now is clear everything in one entry. So basically, even though they might have 10,000 different shipments, they're trying to group them by both client and HS code, because they have to separate it by client, because you got to build a client, right? So you can't group multiple clients, and then you got to separate by HS code because you're required to, but you can't really separate it by like each individual line because you pay the broker per line. So that's the math people are trying to do. Hey, Joe. and trying to get it into the country that way, because like reducing the tariff is one thing, but actually reducing the brokerage cost is a significant cost. If you're going to do a formal entry and every line is going to be separate, you're going to run into a lot of brokerage fees. So, and again, most people are using this to save like a couple dollars per package. So that really goes away very quickly. The other question is around what costs, right? So what we keep telling people is you need to work with a customs broker to figure out how to make sure that you are taking title of the goods in the country and your customers are not. So basically, like if you're shipping it direct to your customer and your customer is buying it from you in your Chinese entity, like they're buying it from the Chinese entity, as far as we understand that needs to be declared at the retail price, the price they're paying. However, if you are buying it with your US entity and then shipping it to your end customer, you can then pay at a much lower cost. Making that work sounds like silly, but like that's just the reality of, tariffs. Like you need to structure it the right way. You can't just say we're going to do the lower cost but not do the work. But a good customs broker can help you set you up to make sure you're doing it in a tariff efficient way. And the other thing you need to think about is tax. So as you change structure of how you bring things in, when you own it, when you sell it, what state it comes in, there are tax ramifications to that as well. And again, you just need to talk to a lawyer to make sure you structure it in such a way that you don't end up paying a lot of extra taxes that you wouldn't otherwise have to. So I've seen a lot of brands, unfortunately, just like, bury their head in the sand and say, we're just gonna declare the manufactured cost and send it straight to our customers and it's gonna be fine. And that's not something you should do. But you can structure it in such a way to reduce tariffs. Like tariff engineering is a massive industry, or not massive, but it's a very significant industry. There's a lot of people in that industry. They can help you, but you need to do the work and speak to those people to make sure you're doing it. Or, if you domicile it in the US and you just use a US 3PL, then you don't have to deal with any of that. So for smaller brands, that probably makes sense. And for larger brands, just make sure you're working with a good customs broker and a good lawyer to make sure that you're minimizing your costs, because you don't want to get a bill later and CBP and the US government will give you large bills later and you're not going to have a choice. You have to pay it. And they come with penalties and fines as well. So Craig asked about other free trade agreements. Cindy, do you have any thoughts on what's going to happen with the other free trade agreements?
Free trade agreements are legal laws. They're laws that were passed by Congress. So it would be difficult to completely do away with free trade agreements without having to go through the legislative process. I'm not saying that couldn't happen. We saw President Trump renegotiate USMCA, which a lot of people said couldn't be done, but he renegotiated it and got that passed. So is this at stake? Possibly, but it does require a little bit more work on behalf of the U.S. government to just suddenly change. Could they change rates? Likely not, to go from completely free or, above, but there could be an assessment of 301 type tariffs. There are a few other authorities that the president has to assess tariffs on, something unilaterally. So I don't think they will be impacted immediately, but I think we all have to keep an eye on free trade agreements if there's any desire to actually renegotiate those going forward, but not an immediate.
Thank you. And then Maggie, there's a question about items transiting through the US from LVK Canada. Do you know the answer to that question?
Yes. So I just want to make sure I have it right for Matthew. YYZ, Toronto to Buffalo, then to rest of world. Right now, we haven't seen any change in that because it's obviously more cost effective to go to rest of world from Buffalo than from Toronto. So Trump hasn't carved that out from what we've seen. So no change at this moment. But we will stay updated. And that's why it's good to have Cindy in our corner.
And if necessary, you just end up just shipping it straight from Canada. It's just slightly more expensive trade lane, but it's not technically difficult. It's just a slight increase in cost.
Yeah, and there was a question about how long do I think CBP will take to actually make these changes? They don't need any time. They've already made the changes. This is a just a current process that CBP has, so they are not going to have to make major changes to this. And there was a discussion as well about, fentanyl being the cause of this, and causing some of the changes to happen, and that the volume, the 1.3 billion shipments, were the cause of some of these changes. And I always push back a little bit on that, because Customs gets the same level of information. And that's why I outlined, they get the security filing, they get the manifest, they get that release request. So I've always pushed back on this idea that Customs doesn't get enough information, because they get almost the exact same information on a formal shipment at the time of release. It's the same. So I really question that, but that's what they can hang their hat on. It's sexy to say, we're combating drugs. It's sexy to say, oh, we're, taking this action to protect our citizens. But really, it has to do with the amount of information that they are looking at. And I think the need to further automate the targeting process. It used to be very automated, and they've taken a step back from the automation.
What about the idea that if we require a formal entry, then someone needs to post a bond and take responsibility for it, versus right now no one is? So even if we catch the fentanyl, we can't hold the bad actors accountable, which means it's all that weight is on the U.S. government versus putting it back on brokers to be responsible for the screening.
Yeah, that's an importer of record question, right? Once you go from a Type 86 or a Section 321 and you go into an entry, whether it's informal or formal, you need an importer of record, somebody who takes responsibility for that. And Customs has long said that they have limited ability to do that in China or other areas, because it's extraterritorial and they don't have the authority and they can't stop them. Yes, it makes it easier for them to have a, throat to choke in the United States. However, what is that going to do? You're just going to see that manufacturer ship through another channel or have another partner. To me, the biggest tool CBP has is they can stop the goods from coming into the United States altogether and turn them around. And that universally is the worst thing that can happen, or they'll seize the goods. They just seize the goods and they can't be sold. So if you have so many shipments that are being turned away, or so many shipments that are being seized, and you have to pay all of this money to either send it back or to go through the seizure process, that has a bigger impact. But Customs wants that importer of record, and I think it's I think they have old thinking that's applying to new situations. They still haven't wrapped their head around this e-commerce model, even though we've been doing it for 10 years, in some cases longer. But I mean, they want to go back to, they want to make America great again and go back to, the 1980s, where there were just these bulk shipping. And to me, e-commerce is truly been the next evolution in shipping. Just like we went from bulk shipping to containerization, now we've gone from containerization to small pack, and they still have to wrap their head around that.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is really hard because Temu is a marketplace, right? So it's not one shipper, it's many shippers, and we have no understanding of who they are. They're outside the US. We can't understand if it's the same person under 100 different names or not. So, turning around any individual shipment or blocking any individual Temu seller is, a game of, futility. It's worse than whack-a-mole. Nothing's going to happen. So I think maybe part of this is the government saying, we don't know how to deal with the fact that there's, 100,000 or 1 million different shippers every year. We're not set up for that. So if we just sort of put the stop to it, that's the best option.
Yeah, I just think it's funny, right? Because when I look at the flow of data between a Type 86, where every shipment has to be manifested, where it's coming from, where it's going to, and that's a requirement to file the Type 86. Once we're in a formal entry scenario, you don't have to list every individual direct-to-consumer shipper. So it could be big box retailer or manufacturer to big box retailer or manufacturer to warehouse. So customs isn't going to get that information in a formal entry process. That's why I think they're trying to take old thinking and apply it to a new scenario, because they're actually going to get less information on the individual shippers and on the individual receivers than they do today. But it falls within their normal pattern of clearance more easily. So I'm interested to see the statistics on how they're handling things now versus how they handle it in the formal entry environment. How many drug seizures is it going to go up? How many all of those? And let's not forget that more than 80% of the drugs that are seized on the southern border in the passenger environment, and over half of those are U.S. citizens.
Yeah, that doesn't play into the narrative, and it's stopping this is not going to stop the flow of fentanyl into the country, but it is pretty wide open. One last question from Karen before we wrap up is about FTZs. So, I don't know, Cindy, any thoughts? Maggie, any thoughts on FTZs?
Coming out, you can't do Section 321 coming out of a foreign trade zone. So that, if that's what you're looking for, you're not going to be able to do it. But if you are manufacturing or have a packaging process that does allow you to take advantage of a foreign trade zone, it is beneficial to look at that as one of the options.
Maggie, any thoughts?
No, yeah, I think it depends. Like it depends on the product, the customer. Like, is it worth it? Like, I think that's the thing. I think we're over engineering and over indexing on things that are going to change potentially, because like, if you look at this, like, how can we not look at them, like go into more depth around FTZs? Yeah. We're always looking how to optimize and kind of like get through these and find the next, for lack of a better term, loophole on some of these lower margin products.
Yeah, I think the place I'm seeing the value of FTZs on people that have like many shipments a week coming in via air, and then they can bring it to the FTZs, pack them there, then do one formal entry every week and reduce those merchant processing fees significantly, delay tariffs on some evergreen products if they need. So there are, for the at scale brands, there's savings in terms of reducing the merchandise processing fees, and the delaying some tariffs. But like Tyler said, you're still going to pay. The tariffs are not going to be reduced at all. So there's an advantage for the right brand, but it's certainly nowhere near like Cindy said, you're not doing 321 out of FTC. You never were able to. That was never a thing. So there's some advantages. So it is for the right person, but it's not going to be nearly the level of savings that maybe some people are expecting.
And remember, your brokerage fees are going to go up if you use a FTZ, because you have 2 entry filings that have to be done. So factor that into the cost.
Yeah, you got to do the math. It works for some big brands. You can save millions of dollars if you have a lot of volume coming through them, but for most brands, it's not going to be the right decision. Okay, we got to wrap up. We're at time. Really, thank you everyone who joined us in the chat. Cindy, really appreciate the insight. If people want to reach out to you directly, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Cindy Allen at tradeforcemultiplier.com. All one word, Cindy Allen, all one word, Tradeforce Multiplier. Give me a shout or go on my website. There's a way to contact me there.
Yeah, and definitely if you have questions, Cindy's an excellent resource that I highly recommend. Maggie, how do people reach you?
Just Maggie at lvk.com.
Super short.
Super easy to do.
Thank you everyone again for joining us. We'll post this and share the link if you missed the beginning, so you can watch the whole thing. Have a great day, everyone, and stay tuned. We'll follow up as we learn more.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Cindy.
Bye.